this morning.
In Perth.
Yeah.
Interesting. COVID going on there. That's interesting to observe. Everyone enjoying the Olympics? Do you know, before we get started, on Wednesday, my son's school was 12th in the medal tables ahead of Russia.
Wow.
With, one of the swimmers and one of the hockey players.
You're not allowed to say Russia, Mark. So yeah. Russia's not competing.
I know. What was it? ROC, which is a brand, isn't it? But something. Russian Olympic. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, something like that.
The ones that are allowed to come in, but not under the Russian banner. But anyway, you know, my son's school was famous for a day.
I was watching the BMX last night. I don't think I've ever watched a BMX with such intensity.
Yeah, amazing. Reminds me of when I was about 14.
Same size bike.
Yeah.
My reflection of the Olympics when I was a kid was just it happened. Obviously, it happens every 4 years, right? And I kind of always thought to myself when I was 8 watching the Olympics, going, I could never be 12. And then suddenly I was 12 watching and never done 16. God, time flies.
So Richard Brown, Russian Olympic Committee. Thanks, Richard, for being the voice of reason as ever.
There we are.
And Sophie's walking in Wiltshire. Very good.
Hey, 3 minutes past 8. And of course, we want to kickstart the weekend. I say weekend, it's not clearly the weekend, but we hope that this turns into something which you can obviously use as a bit of inspiration as we walk into the weekend. I'm off for a couple of days next week, so I'm uber excited about that as well. So I'm going to hopefully get some good reflection points from this morning's session as well with Lex. So look, good morning, everybody. And today, for your viewing pleasure, we've got a real powerhouse for you in the marketing world. Lex is currently the Chief Marketing Officer for L'Oréal for the UK and Ireland. But clearly his CV doesn't just end there. I mean, Lex has worked for some amazing brands. Just to give you a couple of heads up. So he was the head of digital for Europe for McDonald's. He was also on the business partnerships team at Facebook. Lex, did you say you were at Facebook when you were in Paris?
I was, yes.
Awesome. And
I'm a hidden Frenchman, really.
There you go. You can't tell by the accent. You probably lost it over time.
Oh, if you want, I can do the whole morning like this. Huh?
Perfect. I can try and put on my fake Scottish accent too, and I'm sure everybody will then leave. So, you know, maybe best save that. But yes, so worked Facebook, probably one of the first employees in France for Facebook, or certainly part of the founding crew, which is really cool. And he's also spent time agency side at the likes of WPP and Publicis Group as well. So what a great pedigree to be able to have you on the show, to hear about your insights and to really hear about what makes Lex tick, some of his motivations. And interestingly, the secret that you probably don't know is that Lex was a teacher at one point in his life as well, which is pretty cool and close to my heart. Just finally, what's interesting, I kind of did a bit of research on Lex, looked at his LinkedIn profile, and what I absolutely loved was his sort of last line on his profile, that he talks about his 3 girls. He talks about trying to balance his home life with his digital life. And finally, the fact that he's probably more phone obsessed than anybody. He says he's always on the phone, which I'm not sure must have bode well for your personal life there. But just finally, before we get started today, Lex has also been named, there we go. Lex has also been named on the Marketing Week Top 100 and Campaign's Power 100 as well. So look, what a great guest to have on this morning to share some of those insights. So what a pleasure, Lex, to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you both for having me. I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds quite impressive. I'm not quite sure it's as impressive in reality, but great to be with you this morning. Great to be with everybody, wherever you are around the world. I'm in Clapham in London, where the sun's starting to shine, at least for 4 minutes this morning.
Indeed. Mark, why don't you kick off with the question?
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Richie, and welcome, Lex. Great to have you on the show. So let's start inevitably touching upon COVID. As we, in the UK anyway, start to emerge from COVID, what's shifting for you? What's emerging? What's new as we start to put COVID a little bit in the rearview mirror?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think apart from the horrible kind of health impact of COVID, and I think everybody's been touched by that in one way or another. And I'm always kind of hearing stories about people who know people, so I'm always kind of reaching out and hoping that everybody's okay. I think COVID has been a great reset for everybody's personal lives, professional lives, business lives. And I think it's forced everybody to look at what we take for granted. You know, what we have, what we don't have, what we miss. I think for me, there are probably two things that really stick out. One is, when we talk about taking for granted, the in-betweenness of work, the bit about kind of human engagement, the water cooler moments. That sounds so kind of transatlantic as an expression, but the moments in between where you stop somebody in the hallway, or the discussions with a coffee before a meeting starts, or the discussions in the hallway afterwards, those are always so rich, and we've completely lost those. So there's a real piece for me about really understanding that, and that's a piece I think we've taken for granted completely. I think we've also taken for granted a lot some of the people that work in different industries that we never thought of before. Particularly, I think health and logistics for me are the two pieces where, obviously it's come to light massively, the health piece, but in our business, as well, our teams in the warehouses, in logistics and supply and operations have continued to work tirelessly, faithfully, whatever the right word is, through all of this. But I think there's another last thing, which is, I was inspired by the Places We'll Go show. COVID has shown us how fast we can go. Every single person that I work with directly, indirectly in the industry has talked about the intensity and the pace. We found how fast we can go. It's like when you take your car to Europe and you go on the German Autobahn once, you can find how far you can push the needle. Doesn't mean we need to go at that speed all the time. Probably doesn't mean we can. And so I think one of the big things is thinking about how we can now find the right cruising speed. So I think there's two things there, what we take for granted and all the bits that it's really made us see, but also kind of what the right speed and the right pace to go at is. I'm not somebody who likes to go slow, but I don't necessarily want to go at careering speed all the time, because that's when bits start to fall off the car.
Yeah, look, I love that. I love that analogy, by the way, and of clearly the reference to the show. And I remember when we kicked off, I think it was within 2 weeks we had things up and running, and it seems rather simple to be able to put on a show on Zoom like we do. But actually, the key to the magic is what you've just said, where actually it's the consistency over time to kind of drive the car and maintain all the bits that they make sure they don't fall out, is where actually the hard graft comes from. So I think speed is one thing, but it only takes you so far. And then I suspect the consistency element then, needs to be put in place thereafter. And I'd just love to think whether you or hear whether you have a view on, as we move out, what are some of the things that you would want to maintain that consistency on, perhaps where you had the speed, you had the accelerator on one time, you've got things launched, business has pivoted, but actually coming out of this, what are the things you want to keep consistent?
There are lots of things, because I think, when you're in a chaotic period like that, you learn things much more quickly. Unfortunately, I think we were talking about this the other day, it's a part of the human condition that we only learn through experience, through mistakes, through pain. We learn a certain amount in school and in books, but the best experience comes from hard graft and sometimes hard pain. But what do we want to keep? As we go into kind of a hybrid working methodology, I think we found that people work well in different scenarios. We've always talked about how people work, how people interact, different cultures, different groups. And so we know that kind of hybrid's working well. There's so much productivity when you're sitting at home, sitting in front of the screen. I've been calling them the golden hours. I'm not sure that's politically correct, but the morning and the evening, I've spent loads of time that I normally spend in the car on commutes, talking to somebody on the phone and probably not usefully, spent a bunch of time working with startups and working with kind of different non-profits as well. And that's been a better use of my time, and I feel better about myself. In terms of what we're doing, we've tested a lot of things from a marketing point of view on our brands, on our products, with our retail partners. Now we need to know, okay, what works, what doesn't work, what do we need to scale, what has potential for the future? Because I think sometimes we're also very quick to jump to conclusions, whether there's something a new, bright, shiny object, is it strategic, is it now, is it the future? I was just reading, one of my favorite topics is social commerce. I was just reading something this morning about how Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Snap are all pivoting to that. And it's like, is it right? Is it wrong? That's a big space for the future.
So Lex, let's go back in time a little and pivoted from teaching, I believe, but let's just hear about what brought you into marketing in the first place.
So let's talk about the pivoting from teaching, because Richie made a really big deal about that. I did an MBA, and when you do an MBA, you're supposed to do a summer internship. And I think if you look at the way it says it in the rule book, when you do an MBA and you do a summer internship, you have to go to Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. And I've always hated those things. Not hated, but I've just been worried that wasn't right for me. So I said, okay, I'm going to become an English teacher. So I took a Cambridge certificate of English language teaching to adults. I have to be really specific about that, because I can't teach children. I'm not qualified to go and work in a school. But I love that. I love the interaction. I love the teaching. So that's the teaching bit. But what brought me into this world, it's a little bit of that as well. You know, I've had an eclectic, squiggly career, absolutely no plan. You know, I went to undergrad in London and in Marseille in France, so the French connection will start to be more obvious over time. And then I went to Dallas in Texas to work. So it's like there's an obvious step there. I just can't figure out what the explanation is. And I didn't want to, you know, what was trendy at the time. I think there's always a trendy career that people say you need to go into management consulting or you need to go into finance. I think it was management consulting. I think finance was just before, and then it was management consulting. And I couldn't figure out whether I was going to be able to do that. Ironically, at that time, I didn't think I could wear a white shirt and a grey suit every day. And I think I probably do that. Well, not so much now and work from home, but I have been doing that for a few years now. So I met a few people, and really I think which is always the biggest advice is talking to people about what they actually do. You know, what you read about marketing in the books, what you learn, and what the reality of the work is so completely different. And so I fell into an amazing opportunity. It really was, and it's through connections and connections of connections. You know, I fell into what is the largest independent agency in the US. So that was always an interesting place to be because you didn't have the network piece. And what they were doing was taking their strategic planning group and making it into a standalone company. So they were trying to do management consulting. So it's kind of in that space, but it was in an ad agency, which was pretty cool. And then there was the creative and the strategy elements. And that for me was, amongst other things, you know, I think, you know, I sometimes like to talk about a career of learning, but for me, that was super, super formative. You know, I learned about all of strategic planning. I learned all about brands. And then we said, okay, but we're not going to do any advertising and comms. We're going to do other stuff. And we worked with construction groups on how to make their construction sites more brand driving. We worked with retailers on how to do signposting and uniform. We worked with some other kind of retail groups on how they were training their staff and how their staff was speaking. So it's all the other touch points. So I've since been an enormous brand advocate. I love a brand, and that's thanks to that. It's really thanks to that, and it flowed on through that. You know, I was in the agency world, and then traveled to different places in the agency world. But you don't want to hear about my whole life probably first thing on a Friday morning.
Well, actually, no, it's interesting. You probably were ahead of the curve in that sense, because clearly a lot of the ad agencies and the management consultants all sort of seem to be merging beyond the world of comms and into much more sort of holistic consulting and advice, which, you know, around that holistic brand strategy and customer experience, which is kind of where you were sort of playing in back in that day. So kind of interesting to see, and maybe that in many ways set you up to kind of have a stellar career and move up the trajectory pretty quickly, really.
You know, I try to talk a lot about what we do today, which is thinking 2 steps ahead or thinking around the corner. I love that you say I'm ahead of the curve. I'm going to say that all the time now. That was my plan. I've always been ahead of the curve, well, luckily, rather than strategically.
I promise you can steal any words you want from me. It's fine. It's not a problem at all. But, you know, Lex, I want to ask, because clearly, you know, Chief Marketing Officer, L'Oréal, massive deal here. But going back to your point about, you know, to be helpful, what is it that you actually do, given your question that you asked before? So I think, I mean, what do I do today? The Chief Marketing Officer role and the Chief Digital Officer role are very intrinsically linked at L'Oréal. We have a slightly non-traditional structure, but I have a direct team and I guess the indirect, all the marketing teams. But my direct team in the UK is 50-something people, and it's all the expert functions. And so in those expert functions, you've got media. We have a big media team, an internal trading desk. You've got consumer and market insight. So that's the qual and the quant side of things. You've got data science, analytics. You've got some tech teams who are doing innovation, open innovation, and some of our internal services work. And then you've got consumer care, and consumer care kind of closes the loop. And the way I say it is that these teams have a dual role. You know, they have a business as usual role, which is really in those expert functions to keep the business moving every single day. And that's quite exciting. But then they also have a role to be at the front, you know, defining the future of marketing, being ahead of the curve, as you said it yourself. And that's really cool. It's quite hard work, particularly now with the intensity, because you don't have the excuse to say, let me put aside innovation for a little while and come back to that when things are calmer, because that's part of our day-to-day job. And so part of our job is kind of leading the pack and going forwards. And then I work with all of our brands and all of our marketing teams across the board. I love working with our brand general managers, because that's when you see the rubber hit the road. You know, you can get them excited about something, and then they have the scale to go make it happen. So really, I talk a lot. You know, we used to be about digital transformation, then we were about e-commerce transformation, then we were about data transformation. It's all marketing transformation at the end of the day, and that's why those letters and those roles are so interlinked.
Juicy role, Lex. I think you are a future-oriented person. Actually, Keith's just put a comment in. Lex is a futurist and moonshot thinker. You mentioned 2 steps ahead. So maybe you can share a bit of secret sauce with the audience. How do you keep your team and your business 2 steps ahead?
So, I mean, I like the question. I'm not quite sure how much I give up of the secret sauce, and that's it's hard. And I think for me, it's always been about kind of connecting the past with the future. One thing is about staying 2 steps ahead and having an idea of what the future is. The other thing is about making it happen. Lots of people can have good ideas, but you've got to make it happen in reality. And sorry, that's sort of a link back to the reality of marketing. Marketing's a messy job, and the operational element is quite hard. So I think maybe what I do personally and then what we do with the teams are maybe 2 different things. Because we have lots of deep functional experts, I think my job is to try and piece together between the different places, and my direct leadership team we're doing that. We're trying to cross-fertilize all the time, because it's in the cross-fertilization of kind of consumer, creative, technology, that's where the excitement happens. We're big, which is good, and so that means we have the ability to test. So we're trying to test things all the time. And testing is not just about the results. I think sometimes we focus a lot on kind of what's the ROI of this test. The test is more about understanding how something works. That's what excites me. I'm super, super curious, and I want to understand how things work. It's sort of the irony of sitting in front of the TV and not being happy about watching it until you really know how it works. I don't know how TV works, by the way. But so I think for me personally and for the teams, it's that we have to do something. Comes back to our point about experiences. We have to do something to get in behind the scenes to say, okay, what does it take to plumb it all together? And then what does it look like when it's out there? I think just recently we're very pleased to be chosen by TikTok to do something that was quite like a world first on commerce. And it's only by doing it, okay, the results are probably small to start with, we're still in the first few weeks, but that's not the point. It's about understanding how things work, seeing what the impact is, looking at the friction points. So I think that's really where learning comes from. You've got to do things to be able to learn. You've got to keep trying. And then you've got to connect the dots and say, okay, we did this over here, we've got this over here. How do all these pieces fit together, and what does it mean?
Like
I'm giving you the secret sauce for the future. I think the secret sauce for the future, to be honest, at least in marketing, is a little bit back to fundamentals. The space is getting so complicated that you've got to have a good understanding of brand, a good understanding of the consumer, a good understanding of messaging and communications planning, and pull those all together. I have this kind of, I guess it's a catchphrase. I stole it from somebody, but I can't remember who, so I can't credit them. That marketing hasn't changed, but marketers must. And I keep telling all of our marketers that, the fundamentals are the same, but you've got to understand the ecosystem today. You've got to get under the hood. There's too many transatlantic comments now, but you've really got to understand how things work to be able to make it work.
Absolutely. Lex, I want to pick up on, pretty much a sentiment around small acorns grow into big oak trees. And I think your TikTok example is really well made. I suspect that as part of that, you need to forge and foster a culture where you're allowing people the space and time to breathe in these areas, to let things embryonically then pick up and turn into those oak trees. But actually, at the same time, you probably got a lot of weight and pressure on your shoulders from your other management teams and other department heads to kind of go, hey guys, what are we delivering day in, day out, right? And I just love to get your take on how do you balance out the sort of the futuristic view of the world versus actually making sure that you've satisfied the shareholders at B or the stakeholders at B who probably are after your commercial performance.
No, it's true. And I think, that in the digital space, and I sometimes hate that digital world, we've got to be so careful about bright, shiny objects. There is a new bright, shiny object every other day. And the risk is that you kind of throw all your money down that hole and you don't come out. So I think there's a couple of things. I think one is we talk a lot about scale. We run 38 brands in the UK. And so something that works, something that's scaled for me is more than one division. So we're split into 4 divisions, more than one brand, more than one category. And so to get something to scale, then there's a lot of people asking questions. So it's true that our business needs to be big. We're in the mass business, even in the luxury business. It's still a big size business. So the focus on results, the focus on output is always really, really critical. And then we try and control kind of the testing space without kind of getting to micromanagement and over governance. But there are certain people in my team who are really kind of monitoring that roadmap. So when we bring on, let's say, a new startup or somebody we test with, we're going to carefully pick which brands, which category we work with to make sure that it's set up right, guide it through the first execution, guide it through the second and third. And then when we think it's right, that's when you kind of create a little bit of excitement and bubbling up, and then it kind of filters out to other brands and it takes on a life of its own. but it's a great model. It's almost the same model we have with our products. You know, there's things that happen in one category and then they transfer across because we have multiple brands in skincare or multiple brands in makeup. But you're completely right. We've got to be super careful. We've got to be sure that strategically something's right. That's sometimes the moonshot piece, because you've got to see forward into your crystal ball, and then that it's optimized as much as it can be to actually deliver results when it hits scale.
Yeah, makes complete sense. So Lex, just changing tack a little bit. Most, if not all of us, are a bit like the swan on the lake. You know, it all looks very well crafted, but underneath we're paddling pretty hard. I can certainly vouch for that. And many of our guests talk about, you know, they're successful because of their failures. So a little bit about some of the stumbles you've had, where you've had to show resilience, because many people will be experiencing that right now. So when's it been less than perfect?
I think it's less than perfect every single day. Huh? I think it's tough, and we're all those swans. You know, I have a funny story. I think that I sometimes share or sometimes don't share. But you know, so I work for L'Oréal. I'm coming up on 5 years in L'Oréal, coming up on my 3rd role, I think. In about 2003, I'm not quite sure where I was or what I was doing, but I think I was either in between jobs or in between university and a job. I interviewed with L'Oréal in the UK, in the same office that we're in today in Hammersmith. The interior hasn't changed that much. You know, I sort of remember the furniture. I can't remember who I met with, and haven't found out who it is. Probably a good thing. But I sat down with a marketing director on Lancôme, who put kind of some packaging in front of me and asked me to talk about it, and I hadn't got a bloody clue. The packaging's great, huh? It's like silver on the outside. It's got this sort of color on the inside. The writing's embossed. The design is really light. You know, the bottle goes inside. The quality of the cardboard's really good. I didn't say any of those things. I had absolutely no idea. Never got a call back. Never got a job. Not a hope in hell. But look where I got to today. You know, I took a different route, a different way in, and for me it's kind of an interesting one, because it just sort of shows that maybe the way into a role, the way into a step in your career is not quite the same thing that takes you forward, because maybe the door was closed and I came in through the window, or came in through the roof, maybe if it was a moonshot. I think there are lots like that. To be honest, I think every day there are challenges and struggles. I think a lot more of the challenges I have today in my roles are more about people management and being the right sort of leader, because where I am today, that's my focus, is getting the right people in the right place, making sure they're happy, making sure they know what they're supposed to do and who they're supposed to be doing it with. You know, it's about connecting the different skill sets, particularly in the complicated world we have today. We need people to be in their jobs, and we also need cross-fertilization, and that's not easy.
Wow. You know, Lex, it's funny you say that analogy about jumping through the window, the door, and the roof. 8 years ago, I was starting on the journey by myself, quitting the corporate gig and trying to do something different. And I met with this consultant, and he pretty much sort of said, look, you know, when you approach a company, the likelihood is the first person you go to is going to give you a big fat no. But actually, that's never a no is never a real no. It's just, you know, you got to find another route to kind of get to where you want to go. So it's certainly something that I've taken to heart, and I think that's really, you know, really probably held you in good stead around that. But I want to come back to talk a little bit about, you mentioned something quite interesting. And this comes right back to the point where you kind of ended up in that sort of advertising consulting sort of independent agency at the outset. And you said you did it through connections of connections. Now, bear with me, because clearly that's one of the classic ways that people do get into agency life in many respects. And clearly as part of that, that's then obviously ended up where a lot of people don't get those opportunities as a consequence. And I know the way of the world is probably changing and evolving. And I think the School of Marketing is trying to play its role in being able to actually open a few more opportunities and doors in different ways. But if you've got a young person today trying to get through, what would be some of the ways and advice that you'd be giving them to try and help them through into some of these organizations that you've worked in?
No, I think it's a great question, and you highlight something that's a real challenge for us, is to try and really make sure that our intake is balanced and that it's not like that. So I think, I don't know, I can tell you that from a L'Oréal point of view, it doesn't necessarily work like that anymore. It's not just about connections for connections. One, because, you know, we are so, I was going to say so popular, but that doesn't sound very good. So I'm not going to say that. You know, we're such an attractive employer that we get a lot of requests for internships, for grad schemes, for all these roles. So we are super efficient and super organized. We have an amazing talent acquisition team who are looking at people across the board at different levels. So it's quite structured, not automated, because there are a lot of humans behind it. but it means that everybody gets a fair share and a fair balance. So even when you get somebody who's reaching out directly, they're still filtered through kind of the right process that puts people on an even keel. So I do though think, and this is, you know, I always hated those conversations where people tell you that you're supposed to do a CV and a cover letter that's adapted for each job. I'm like, Christ, that's a bloody nightmare. I don't have the time, the energy, or the desire to do that. But what I do quite a lot, because I'm careful about how much time I give to it, is talk to people about what the jobs are really about. You know, it's about finding out what happens internally. And I think that's maybe the modern equivalent of having a connection or doing that personalization. And it's like, what's the reality of the role? Come in, give me the keywords that are going to get you through the door, but then talk to me that you really know what the job's about, really know what the day-to-day is about, because it's hard graft marketing, not just with us, everywhere. You know, it's as I said, it's a messy business, it's a real people business, it's art and science. So I think it's really important, and we were talking about this with your students on the mentoring program just the day before yesterday. You know, really understand what work is about, what day-to-day is, so that you can show, one, you understand all the strategic elements. Everybody loves to talk about strategy, everybody loves to talk about digital. Those are the words that get you through the door. And then it's like, okay, then show me that you know about data, you know how to use Excel, you're a good communicator, you understand what we're trying to do. I think those are really the keys today. I can at least say from our point of view that our process is rigid, it's structured, it works well, it doesn't penalize people. You know, I have a lot of conversations about kind of how we look at CVs and how that portrays people these days. I have to say I love LinkedIn for that, because it's standardized everything. It stopped people being criticized for using Microsoft Word CV templates or by accident putting their CV into Comic Sans or Calibri, which are my favorite fonts, of course. But
yeah, I think you can be unashamed that you have a fantastic employer brand and are highly in demand. But you mentioned about leadership. You said it actually sounded like the marketing piece. My job is to put the right people in the right places and all that. But I'm interested to know who is Lex as a leader? What's it like to work for you? And then we sometimes go into the slightly existential question: Would you like to work for yourself? If you can sort of get your head around that.
My goodness, those are the hard questions on a Friday morning. Who am I as a leader? You know, I think one of the questions you asked me in preparing this was something about kind of self-doubt and imposter syndrome always jumps up there. So who am I as a leader? I'm someone who's battling every day. I'm an introvert, I'm all of those things. And so I think as a leader, I battle every day with who I think I should be and who I am really. And I know that my good days are when I rely on my own self-awareness and I am my true self. And my true self is somebody who likes to collaborate and work with people. I hate kind of saying something and sitting back, but then I'm also quite passionate and enthusiastic. So I try to share my vision as much as possible, share my enthusiasm, share the direction. And then I want people to go off a little bit and be able to work with them. So I think sometimes as a leader, I'm somebody who goes quite fast. I'm always kind of chasing and I know we go super fast at L'Oréal. So I have to kind of hold myself back a little bit and say, listen, we're doing a pretty good job. So let's kind of give people a breather. And I hope over the last kind of 8, 12, 15 months, we've started to give people a little bit of a breather and take the pressure off, because there's so much pressure everywhere. So I'm very enthusiastic. I like to, you know, I'm an introvert on the one hand, but I do like to communicate. I like to talk. You know, there's a wonderful book, I think it was Quiet by Susan Cain, that kind of explains who introverts are, and they're not scared of standing up in public and talking to people. I love that. I love telling a story. But it's just about the right context and the right environment and how you interact with people. So I think as a leader, I probably got a yin and a yang, and sometimes they hit my bad days, and I'm sure there are people who would say that they hit my bad days more often than others. So I'm sorry about that. But I really enjoy working with teams and leading teams. I guess your second question, I like your second question, and it's would I work for me? And I think I would, as long as I understood who that person is and managed to find the right fit. You know, doing these exercises where you really understand the individuals, understand who you are and who they are, and how the working methods fit together. Because then I know that they got my back, they can help me, they like to collaborate and work on things together. And then there's this knowledge that bringing different skill sets and different experiences, be it different industries, different category knowledge, all together in one place actually makes the output richer.
You know, Lex, I think your enthusiasm is truly infectious, quite frankly, and I know I've already witnessed your speed firsthand. Where I think we set up the fastest meeting ever. One email back and forth, and then straight on to Zoom. Was an incredible an incredible feat that we achieved a few weeks ago, which was brilliant. We've got a couple of questions coming in for you, Lex, and maybe somewhat related, but let me go to Richard's question first. So bearing in mind marketing fundamentals never really change, what's your take on brand purpose, particularly with L'Oréal's connection with self-esteem?
So I'm gonna be careful about kind of L'Oréal's connection with self-esteem, because we have a lot of different brands and each one has kind of a different purpose and a different cause. And then at a group, we have a purpose, which is kind of create the beauty that moves the world. And that's really sort of where we are. So maybe I'll talk quickly about kind of L'Oréal's purpose, and then I'll talk more broadly. You know, as a group, we're a pure player in beauty. So different from some of our competitors who operate in other categories together. We're a pure player in beauty, which is great, because it means that we are super focused on beauty and all the categories. But what we really believe is kind of a couple of fundamentals. One, that everybody's vision of beauty is different and everybody's portrayal of beauty is different. So that comes across in kind of what categories you use, what product you use, how it makes you look, how it makes you feel, what culture, where you are around the world. So I think that's really important. There's not a single vision of what beauty is. And then the second piece is kind of this notion of beauty that moves the world, because it's really, really important. You know, beauty is about self-esteem. It's about how you feel. It's about how you want to portray yourself. And so it's super, super important to drive people and to keep them together. And then there's the economic element. You know, everybody's always heard of the lipstick effect, you know, that people buy these things even when the economy's bad, because it gives them a lift. And so beauty is quite important. You know, we don't want to say it's critical. You know, it's not somewhere on Maslow's hierarchy, but it's super important from a deep point of view. It's not just skin deep. If we talk bigger at a brand purpose level, I love that, but I love that from a marketing fundamentals point of view. You know, going back to this role I had, you know, brands are strong when they really portray something that's deep and they're clear about it. And so that's either about their product or about their purpose or about their founder and about who they are. So I think there's two pieces to that. One is that when a brand is well executed, you know, as my favorite crush Mark Ritson would say, when you've codified the shit out of it, when it's really, really clear, then it comes across. And then it's obviously even stronger when you've got a real purpose to it. You know, one of my favorite brands in the portfolio, and I'm always getting in trouble for talking about a single brand, is La Roche-Posay. La Roche-Posay is a skincare brand in our active cosmetics division, so it's kind of predominantly sold through pharmacies. But it comes from a thermal source. So one, you've got this kind of geographic, natural element to it. It's super, super, super medical grade skincare. So it's amazing what it does. And they work with burn victims, cancer treatments, all these things because of the quality of what it does. So there's amazing two pillars there that say, okay, there's something natural about this. There's something about the source, something about the history. There's something about how it's being used and the medical side of it. And so all of these things that come through in the communication are super, super strong. And I think that's a great example of not trying to create an artificial purpose or an artificial cause and kind of sticking it on, but it's there in the fundamentals. And so, you know, that's these two things. You know, it's about truly good branding, and then it's about saying, yeah, there's a purpose behind what I'm doing. And I think all brands have to find that. You know, you go back to the founder, you go back to the core. There's a reason people create things. There's very few, I think, really strong brands, really amazing products set up by a guy who said, I'm going to go and make some money. You know, I think, and that's my passion too. You know, my passion is creativity, not creativity in the artist sense or the musical sense, because I'm not like that, but it's about creating something. And I think that's where the joy comes from. And then when you see the impact, when you see the scale, that's when you get the success.
That passion really shines through. We've got a couple of questions, but before we go to those, this is a self-indulgent moment. I met a chap called Patrice Beauchamp, who was ex-L'Oréal about 12 years ago, and he spun out a brand consultancy agency. And he told the story that the line, because I'm worth it, was at the same time one of the most reviled and hated lines in consumer research, because it sort of said, you know, I need makeup to make me feel good. But at the same time, one of the most successful. So is that story true? I mean, it'd be slightly crushing if it wasn't, but is that story true? And then maybe more broadly, what's in the line?
Wow. So I think the story's true. There's a lot of myth around that story. It came out of a copywriter in the US. Our CEO at the time, I think it was Lindsay Owen Jones, kind of brought it back to the board or to the executive committee and said, we've got to do this. And everyone said, oh, I think there are some stories about how it tested badly and they didn't want to do it. But he kind of had the instinct and the goal to say, we're going to do it. I'm going to do it everywhere. I'm going to do it big. So I think the story's true. I think there's a piece, you know, about true marketing there. You know, I don't want to be the teacher or the arrogant one. But, you know, there's always this thing in marketing where somebody comes to you and says, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And they're like, who's the target audience? And well, it's everybody. It's kind of men and women 18 to 55. And so that's not a target audience. So who's the segment? Who are you really going after? Good marketing, good communication segments, doesn't it? If you're going after a certain group of people, then it works with them and it doesn't work with others. And it may well be completely rejected by others. But that's why it works, because it fits with a certain group of people. So I think there is a real strength there. In terms of what it means, I mean, it's specifically L'Oréal Paris. I think we always have this challenge. You know, we're the group. We have a lot of brands. We have a couple that are named L'Oréal Paris, L'Oréal Pro. That's specifically L'Oréal Paris. And L'Oréal's Paris positioning in the world is really about female empowerment. And so that phrase, it encompasses it all. And it's true. That's what the brand stands for in everything that it does. You know, whether it's globally, they're standing up to street harassment, in the UK, working with the Prince's Trust. There's a lot there. And so, yes, so there's a purpose, there's a cause behind it. It comes through in that line. And I think everything about that line is true. And it's a great story as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Sounds super. I love the fact that you keep, you know, you talked about the, you know, doing it big, and actually, you know, the other words you're using around scale. And I clearly get the reasons why, given the mass nature of the organization, luxury mass nature of the organization. But actually, I've always been told, and more often than not in the startup ecosystem world, it's actually do things that don't scale first, which then allow you to kind of have that little sort of ecosystem, which then allows you to maybe build infrastructure if it's working. And the classics, the Airbnb that, you know, they sold cereal at the time in order to kind of get the cash in to then go off, or they decided to actually have put mattresses on their own flat floors in order to kind of see if the idea's got any legs. So do you feel there is actually a space for don't scale at all in this, and then see if it actually works in a micro environment, where then you can start to build up bigger infrastructure?
So I mean, I work with a bunch of startups, and I really love that, because I mean, it gets me out of my kind of my day-to-day job, and sometimes into different categories, and sometimes into close categories. I think there's something interesting what you say, but you know, then you have to put your data and your scientist hat on. You know, if you want to look at results and make some analysis based on results, they've got to be representative. They've got to be big enough. They've got to be statistically significant. I think there are different phases in getting to that. Obviously, particularly in startups, and particularly in tech startups, you know, we say startups and we automatically think tech these days, but that's not always the case. You know, you've got to get the bugs and the consumer journey ironed out. And so that's why it's important to put a few people through to make sure they're testing everything. Because, you know, when you test internally, however rigorous you are, you're never always hitting all the right corners or all the right steps. You never thought that someone would do step 7 and 3 and then 12 in that order. So I think there is massive importance to that in the tech space, to say, okay, throw a few people at something, really make sure they figure it out. It's like when you take your kids into a new car or a different car, and they press every single button, and then you figure out that when you lock the front door, the back windows don't open or something like that. So I think there's a testing piece there. But I still think, you know, sometimes in our research, you have this modern dilemma of panel versus big data. You need a certain amount of scale and representation to figure out if something's going to be productive, successful, and drive the business. So I think there are probably good phases that we need to understand. And yes, particularly in startups and particularly in tech, you need to go slow first, because when you throw a lot of customers at something and it's broken, you probably lose those customers once and for all.
Yeah, that talks very much to Seth Godin's core principle of, you know, finding the smallest possible addressable universe and building from there. Now, Keith asked a question a little while ago. Sorry, it took a little while to get here, Keith. Increasing conversation around climate issues, permeating all the way through marketing and beyond. What are L'Oréal's sustainable development goals to help achieve the race to net zero?
So there are a lot of goals, and actually, to be honest, I'm not good at remembering them all, and I'm not gonna carve them out. But you know, there are a bunch of things that L'Oréal's done. L'Oréal's had 2 very external-facing programs. And the reality is that behind the scenes, you know, we've been working on this for a long time. We've had a lot of very strong leaders who have really put this at the forefront for a long time. So if you go and look at kind of our carbon project results and all these sort of things, you know, we've been rewarded over time. We had an initial project that finished, I think, in 2020, and then a new project called L'Oréal for the Future that's just been launched kind of last year, and that's really future looking and much broader than before. And I would recommend everybody to go to the site and read about those goals. But what it is really about saying, okay, what are the real biodiversity challenges? What are the real planetary challenges? And how can we as an organization, but also in our ecosystem, start to work on them? And I think that's what's really exciting about where the organization's going. When you're big, you can have really big, hairy, audacious goals and really look back at the impact. And so when you think about, our supply chain and how far we go down the supply chain to look at what's going on and look at the impact it's having. But then there are also kind of very, very small things that we can do. I think, so we run of the 38 brands, I think we run 12 direct to consumer sites in the UK. And in London, all of our deliveries are electric now. So that's a very small impact, but it's something to say, okay, we're doing this, we're making progress, we're going forward. Then there are things at a product level, we just announced with some other big CPG players, packaging changes, whether it's in the recycling space or whether it's in the carbon space. So there's a lot of different things happening. And then there's this bigger picture of where we're going towards those goals. And I think that's a real strength of our previous CEO now, Jean-Paul Agon, who really kind of had that as one of his main pillars, what he calls the kind of the extra financial measures.
Well, Lex, we're totally running short on time here, but I'm just going to ask one last question before we start to wrap up and close. Just all related to the future of work and where you're seeing yourself. It's a question coming from Dia, just around whether you think this will, when you're working from home environment, is going to stick, and perhaps are you enjoying these sort of the Zoom world that you're living in, and whether you see the world kind of going back to a little bit more of where we were before pre-COVID.
So I think I love that expression, which is moderation in everything, including moderation. I think we're going to go to a mix, a hybrid, a balance of everything. We need that. We need a little bit of, we found what's good about working from home, but we know what's good about kind of, as we talked about earlier, that kind of the water cooler moments in the office. But that's a bit like everything we do, everything in moderation. We mix it. We mix in marketing. We mix channels. That's what life is about. It's about finding balance and finding balance between these things. So I think we are headed towards a new way of working. But I want to see people. I want to sit down. I need a little bit less screen time. I really enjoy sitting down with a nice felt pen and a big A3 piece of paper and starting to make notes and draw things. That's the way I think, and that's sometimes harder. I've not really succeeded with any of the kind of shared whiteboards and that sort of thing. So, what was the second part of your question? I got so carried away with the first, I've lost.
I think you've sort of answered it in terms of just the moderation for moderation and getting that clear balance, and obviously your personal reflections on where you see you want to spend your time in terms of virtual versus face to face. I think we're all good on that front. I suspect we have to wrap up, given we're close to close, Mark. So I'm handing to you for your reflections.
Yeah, thanks, Richie. Wonderful to hear your insights, Lex. Passion and enthusiasm come through in abundance. I'm just going to do a couple of reflections, things that I've heard, just to recap for everybody that's watching and going to on the playback. You talked a lot about speed, about moving fast. We've discovered how fast we can be. And whilst we need moderation and balance, we've probably all discovered something new, which is a great benefit. You talked about staying 2 steps ahead. Didn't give away too much secret sauce, but still very useful to understand how you pull that all together. But you did really focus on the fact that marketing there's a sort of a gap, there's a reality, there's a messiness, it's complicated, and the power to simplify is really critical. I love the fact that you came in through the window rather than through the door, and it talks to the fact that so many successful people have gone a bit the path less traveled to get to where they are, and that's really borne out in the fact that you said you battle every day. We're all swans, and the fact that somebody can be so successful when in effect, we're all imperfect and we all battle every day. But more than anything, it's your pace and passion that comes through. And I love the fact that you talk to being an introvert, but being a collaborator. Again, that talks to the fact that I think you've kind of sussed some of the big conundrums in life about how you get the best out of yourself. And I like the fact that you would want to work for yourself. I've never actually answered the question myself, or at least not out loud. But that's a really positive thing. So lovely to have you on.
Tough question, that one.
Yeah, well, it's a banker for us from time to time, but great to have you on. And I know that on behalf of everybody, everyone would have really super appreciated your insights and your time. So thank you, Lex. And back to you, Richie, for your thoughts and close.
Thank you. Mark, you've summed it up beautifully, quite honestly. And that's just for me to say, thank you so much, Lex, for your time this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you both on and off the show. I think, the reflection that Mark said around, you jumping through the window, but of course you're talking about the roof of the door and all sorts of other ways in which way is this perhaps some of the sum in which you live your life and maybe kind of break through so many of those barriers, whether it be from diversity all the way through to the boardroom and through to sort of clearly the way that you execute in marketing as well. So it's just absolutely brilliant to have you on the show this morning, Lex. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. It's been fun, even with the difficult questions from Mark.
There we go. I'm glad that I didn't give you those ones today, so I didn't give you the hard time. You can blame him. Guys, we are here every Friday, as you know. Next week, we got another great guest on, Carrie Rose, who's the founder of Rise at 7, a stellar agency that has now shot absolute fame. And Carrie's personal brand has no less in our world as well. She was voted in the campaign's top marketers of our day as well. So tune in next week, same time, same place. See you all then. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Great weekends. Thanks again, Lex.
Thanks, Lex.